Hello and welcome. Coming up, how dangerous is this world being remade by Trump? I'll ask Britain's former top spy, Alex Younger. Surely Trump's first 100 days are the worst, not the best in American presidential history. His former ambassador to Denmark, Carla, will make the case for him. Why is the government doing too little to prevent the flooding of roads and rail and the overheating of railway track? Transport Secretary Heidi will explain. Anushka and Screeny know who British people blame for our lacklustre economy. Is it Starmer or Trump?
The British people blame lots of things, but there is one clear winner.
And perhaps the last grandees in British politics, the Tories, Sir Andrew Mitchell and Labour's Dame Emily Thornberry. Watcher. Tony Blair's report into climate change is built on two assumptions. Voters are selfish and, how can I put this delicately, seems to me he thinks you're a bit thick. The ex-Labour Prime Minister argues that we all know carbon dioxide emissions are rising, in part because of China and India, and that there's no point in spending a fortune to reduce our emissions to net zero when our energy needs are too small to make a material difference to climate change. So, on the one hand, he thinks we're all mini Trumps who believe there's no value in virtue or setting a good example. But more importantly, the big reason why energy prices in the UK are so much higher than in the rest of Europe is our reliance on expensive imported gas, not the shift to climate-friendly technologies. If we had more nuclear, like France, or hydro, like Norway, or solar, like Spain, we would pay less for power. So, an intelligent assessment, and all of you are super intelligent, would say we need to move faster, not slower, to renewables. Eccentrically, Blair does say we should invest billions in a technology that buries carbon dioxide produced from gas-fired electricity generation. However, this carbon capture technology is unproven, and it will make our energy more expensive. It's actually the kind of technology Trump would back if he cared about climate change at all. It's of a piece with Trump declaring his first 100 days as the most successful in American presidential history, on the day that his tariffs were shown to have caused a record US trade deficit, and on the eve of proof that he took a booming American economy and turned it into a shrinking one. If Trump rode to power on a global populist wave of disillusionment with centrist technocrats, he's showing why boring competence may not be all that bad. Now, Blair used to be the technocrat's technocrat. The new folk hero of centrist dads is Mark Carney. Let's hope he doesn't muck it up. Anushka.
Thank you. In just 100 days, Donald Trump has upended the world order. This huge Ipsos poll covers almost 23,000 people across 29 countries. And this question asks people, do you think a particular country will have a positive influence on world affairs over the next decade? It turns out everyone loves Canada. In red, they have topped this list since 2015. The EU and Britain are doing well here. But let's just look at the US and China. In 2015, the US was well ahead. A big majority saw it as a force for good. Now, I think I can zoom in on that. Not there. Is this going to work for me? Now, China is actually ahead. 49% think it will be a positive influence for the world, more than the US's 46%. Now, that 46% is an average, but I've pulled out the figures of some interesting countries. Peruvians, Indians and Americans, no surprise, are well above that average. But Canadians are all the way over here. Only 19% of them now think the US will be a force for good. And there is a lot of scepticism in Europe too. We've picked out France, Britain here, only 39%. Maybe folk are scarred by Trump's tariffs and, as Robert said, bad news on the economy. Here you go, that there was are shrinking in the first 3 months of this year. If that is repeated, it would, of course, be a recession. But it's worth saying that people in Britain are pretty glum about the economy too. An Ipsos poll here said that 73% of people think the UK economy is in a poor state. Ipsos then asked that 73% why, and we have the results exclusive for Peston. A lot of factors we talk about, things like Brexit, Trump, the Conservatives, Russia and Ukraine, COVID. But top of the list, 56% think it's decisions by the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, and Chancellor Rachel Reeves that are to blame.
Gosh, so much to chew over. Emily, I'm going to go to you first. As I pointed out in my introduction, Donald Trump inherits a booming American economy. Economy is now shrinking. This is all down to his tariffs and his economic policies. No secret, he's been terrible for the global economy. And yet, British voters are more critical of your Prime Minister and your Chancellor. That's a concern, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's a concern. I presume that people have more than one answer that they could opt for, so they presumably voted for a number, and the one they voted for the most often. So I'm saying it isn't 56% thought that it was only the British government.
But it was their top choice.
But it was their top choice.
And why do you think that is? Why are they more focused on the policies of your government than on Trump's chaos?
Because I think we're closer to home. There's more clear information about what the government is doing. And I think people look across the Atlantic and just see chaos, and it's quite difficult to work out what on earth is going on because things change every 20 minutes and there's different announcements, and so people just get bewildered by that. They said that that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to flood the zone with lots and lots of information or quasi-information and confuse people. That is what they're doing. And so for the British public not to appreciate exactly what it is that the US is doing, quite understand. Whereas I think it's clearer what it is that the British government's doing, and that is trying to stop the rot, trying to turn things round, and it's taking a while.
I think we're off the watershed, so I think I can point out that the technical term used by Steve Bannon was flood the zone with shit, I seem to remember.
Well, yes. I obviously would never use such terms.
Yeah, sorry, it's beneath me to suggest you might. Andrew, so we've got an electorate that's a bit disillusioned with the Labour government, but they're not turning to the Tories. All the signs are that in the local elections and mayoral elections tomorrow, it's going to be an absolute car crash for your party. Why is it that in these circumstances, voters seem to prefer reform than they do you?
Well, I think for the Conservative Party, these are early days. We suffered a shattering defeat last year. We've been in power for 14 years. It will be a while before we get a serious audience from the British public. And what will deliver that audience will be when we have done the policy work to show people that it's worth returning to the Conservative Party. Those who deserted us at the last election will feel that they can come back because the Conservative Party has assembled the right policies. And that is the key thing. And that's why it's quite wrong to start talking about alliances with Reform and so on, who are a protest party. They ventilate anxieties and concerns, but they don't constructively deal with them. And the job of the Conservative Party is to do that. It's going to take a bit of time. And I think tomorrow may be difficult for us. After all, these elections take place on the back of elections 4 years ago where we were on a high. And in fact, we won at the same night the Hartlepool by-election, if I remember correctly. So I think tomorrow will be difficult for the Conservative Party. But the answer to the Conservative Party's problems is to develop the right policies to address the issues that people care about and the issues that caused people to leave us at the last election.
And just very briefly, so I want to go to Alexander, former head of MI6 in a second, but just very briefly, some of your colleagues are just taking the view that because Farage and his previous parties have always imploded, that, you'll be rescued because this one will implode. Now, others of your colleagues think that's desperately naive and that actually he may not bail you out this time by simply doing things that leads to self-destruction. Which view do you take?
Well, it's clear it would be facile to rely upon the Tory party's recovery being the implosion of Nigel Farage's party. But, of course, his is a very much a one-man show, so they are vulnerable to all those things. But the answer, as I say, is for the Tory party to develop the right policies to attract people back. It's not to rely on Farage combusting and disappearing. It is to tackle the issues and to show that Reform is a protest party, but we are a serious party which will come up with the right policies.
Emily, I'm going to come back to you in just a minute. I'm delighted to be joined by Alex Younger, former head of MI6. Alex, you would have seen the data that Anushka put on the screen. And I think, in a way, for those people of our generation, it is pretty shocking that fewer than half the people in 29 countries no longer see America as a force for good. And this is all because of what Trump has done. How worried should we be about that?
We should be very worried. Trump has repudiated the system that America created, the alliances and institutions that have kept us all safe. He's questioned his commitment to NATO, and he's done stuff that people either don't understand or just violently dislike. It's not all about Trump, though. In some ways, I think we've become infantilized by our relationship with the United States. And the reality is it can't. The world is now much bigger than the United States, and its ability to make the rules and keep us all safe and give us a hug is diminished anyway. So
you're saying, in a
way,
he's been good for us because our dependence on America was too great. Is that
well,
what you're saying?
That's pushing it too far, but I think that Europe, in any case, had a wake-up coming. It didn't own its own future. It didn't own its own security. It lost the capacity to generate its own hard power. It had forgotten how to innovate. This wasn't going to end well, and we needed a jolt. Now, yeah, I wouldn't have chosen for it to happen in this way, and maybe it's come early. But I do get a sense that this is a moment where Europe could actually wake up and be different.
I'm going to come back to that in just a minute. But how the other side of all of this is the growing number of people who are prepared to say very positive things about a Chinese government that not only doesn't share our values, but whose values are antithetical to ours. Europe, let's say, takes its destiny into its own hands. What do we do about this?
Look, I think it's nuts to... we're cross with Donald Trump. He's put a whole load of people in place who you probably wouldn't invite round to your house for dinner. All that stuff is true. Are you really telling me you see a moral equivalence, though?
Well, I'm not telling you that, but I'm saying,
right.
but millions and millions and millions of people around the world do.
Well, folks see a moral equivalence between Washington and a country run by the Communist Party without any accountability to their own people that acts capriciously without their interests in mind. It's nuts. And I think this is a function of exactly what I'm talking about. We've been insulated from the reality for such a long time that it's now quite challenging us to actually think through what we've got, the freedoms we have, the democracy, the prosperity. We're just taking it for granted. And it is a wonderful thing, and we should enjoy it, but it needs to be defended.
And it needs to be defended in two ways. One is we've got to get our economies growing faster so we can generate the wealth, not only to raise people's living standards, but also to invest sufficient amounts in our security, in our defence. Are we, in the UK, in Europe, moving fast enough when it comes to expanding our defensive capabilities?
We are moving, and that is good, but we really have a mountain to climb. We disarmed militarily, we disarmed our military industrial complex, and I would argue also that culturally we've disarmed. There's a mountain to climb, but it is changing really fast. I think what happened in Germany was miraculous. I don't think anybody would have predicted that, and I think it makes Putin's life much more complicated. I think Europe's getting a sense of its hard power. I think the UK is rediscovering a security relationship and is a positive force for good in that context. It's going in the right direction. We've got a bit of time. Putin really screwed up with the war. His army's a mess, but we really, really need to get a move on.
OK, Putin may have screwed up, but in terms of these negotiations on a settlement for Ukraine, he appears to have the upper hand in the sense that America is now saying it is in favour of a transfer of formal sovereignty over Crimea to Moscow. Can and should Europe oppose that settlement?
Look, who knows what's going on when the negotiations are, and there are mixed signals coming out at the moment. I personally think there's a huge gap still between the Russian position and the Ukrainian position. One that even...
What about the gap? Is there a
Trump-
gap between the Moscow position and the Washington position?
Well, I think that there is an issue that, Trump fundamentally agrees that Ukraine's out of line, that big countries get to set the rules in their own backyards. He and Witkoff have been accepting of the Putin line to an extent that really worries me. I think the bigger issue, though, is that it's not about, as I've said on this show before, it's not actually about territory. It's about whether Ukraine continues to exist as a country. Yeah. And Russia's pushing this idea of denazification, which means vetoing the government, and demilitarization, which means limiting the army.
And we can't accept that.
If that goes through, you haven't got a Ukraine, we've lost. But Putin has to get that through, because if he doesn't, there's no way he can justify the sacrifices imposed on his people. And Zelensky can't accept this stuff. So I'm bearish about the possibility anytime soon of a real agreement.
And what happens? So Trump walks away?
Well, he may find a way of just finding something synthetic that's gone well, declaring victory and leaving. I think that's eminently possible. There's blaming Zelensky. We've been there before. And there's just an interesting thing going on, which would be funny if it wasn't so terrible, is that really both sides, but particularly Russia, are manoeuvring in the knowledge that there isn't really any progress to make it look like the other person's fault. And Putin, whilst he can't really move, is desperate to stay in Trump's good books. It's a huge play for him.
We're almost out of time. Just on this, I've got one final question. Is the central scenario that you can see broadly that Europe's support over perhaps many more months and years will have to just be stepped up for Kyiv?
Thank you, because there's this idea that if the Americans go, it's game over, and it would be a grievous blow, and it would be very hard for Ukraine to hold the line. But Ukraine now has the biggest army in Europe, produces more drones in a week than the rest of us produce in a year. It's got prodigious capabilities. Russia can't actually subdue Ukraine.
So we can sustain, Europe can sustain Kyiv.
And money spent keeping that going is money spent that will otherwise lead to, if you don't do that, you're going to face a far, far bigger problem down the track.
And can I change the subject completely? And we haven't got much time to ask about this, but I've been really interested in the hack at Marks and Spencer and talking to very senior people, both within that company and outside. They basically say companies can no longer prevent these attacks. They're too big, they're too sprawling, there are always ways in. They also say, by the way, the government can't prevent it either. How worried are you that at some point, maybe not that far off, that a hostile state brings down one of our critical networks?
So I think we should be worried about it. I think we are digitally vulnerable. It's intrinsic. And our enemies, like Russia, don't have those vulnerabilities. So we should worry about it. But I think what you said at the beginning is a counsel of despair. There will never be perfect security. But I do not want to use that attitude to justify a woeful lack of focus and investment.
No. I mean, we've obviously got to find ways to minimise the risk.
We really do.
But what we can't pretend is it's not a risk.
Well, it is always going to be a risk. And the revelations about Chinese cyber capabilities that the US government came up with a few months back shows that states can get into our networks pretty well at will. We need to focus on this more. But no, you will never get perfect security. You're never going to get perfect security in life. It's not like that.
Alex, as always, thank you so much for joining us. That was absolutely fascinating. I'm going to ask both of you an incredibly easy question, and it follows on from my conversation with Alex. I'll start with you, Emily. What's the worst thing, in your view, that Trump has done? If you can think of a good thing, that's also...
There's a good question. I think the worst thing was what we saw in the White House with Zelensky. That was very frightening and a terrible scene. And I think it really shook us, as to what was going to happen next. I mean, fortunately, they've been pulled back from the brink, and largely, I think, by us. So, we should pause for a moment and remember the contribution that we made in terms of calming that down. But I think that was the worst moment that I remember of the 100 days, although there is so much. I wake up each morning and think, what has happened now? And it's quite difficult to to sift out the noise from what he's actually doing. I think that's the other thing, you know. So he keeps making announcements. He upstages the Pope when the Pope's at the Pope's funeral. He does this, he does that. But we have to kind of think through what is it that he's actually doing and what is serious. I mean, obviously, there's a lot going on in America, which, frankly, we don't necessarily pay a great deal of attention to. But his effect on international relationships is profound, and we need to keep our eye on that. I think that there are things that he could do that would be positive and helpful and a good thing to do, and if he used his strength in the right way.
What are they?
Well, I think that he is strong enough, with the assistance of countries that could put together a detailed deal. He's strong enough to be able to push forward a deal in the Middle East. I think that if Saudi Arabia, Britain, France, the other Gulf states, players such as Jordan and Egypt, actually put forward a detailed plan and gave it to Trump and said to Trump, this is your peace prize. You could do this. You have the strength of 12 presidents who haven't done this yet. Why don't you explain to the Israelis this is the only way that they're going to be secure? Then that would be a huge achievement. And I think it's possible. I don't think it's likely, but I think it's worth a try. I think he could also use his strength to stand up to Putin and to be able to find a peace that was sustainable and fair for the Ukrainians. But it's a question of kind of sustaining his focus long enough for him to understand you can't get a deal in a day, but if you work with other countries, you can get some good deals if you're prepared to take risks, which he clearly is prepared to do.
Andrew, you've devoted much of your life to development and helping the developing world. You must have been absolutely horrified by the dismantling of USAID and the withdrawal of all that support for vulnerable people across the world.
Yes, I was horrified. And also it seemed to fly in the face of the brilliant Republican record on tackling HIV/AIDS, for example, that George Bush set up PEPFAR, which has saved millions of lives, particularly in the Horn of Africa. But to your central question,
yeah.
I rather agree with Emily about the importance of his focus on the Middle East. One shouldn't forget that the Abraham Accords were one of the successes of his first time as president. And I very much hope that he will focus back on the Middle East and build on all of that. In terms of the worst moment, I think that Emily makes a powerful case for the bullying in the Oval Office, which I thought was absolutely appalling. However, the worst moment for me was when America, siding with Russia and North Korea, voted at the UN against all their traditional allies, which I thought was a terrifically bad moment because, and this is the point I would wish to challenge the president on, that marked the destruction of a consensus that's gone on for 80 years, which has helped to build an international system. And I think that pulled a huge chunk out of the international system at a time when we really need it.
I mean, extraordinary history we've been witnessing, much of it not good. Anushka, you've got some stuff to share with us.
Yeah, with 100 days of Trump done, we just have 1,361 left to go. So what do American voters think so far? These are presidential approval ratings from the New York Times. He is down from 52% to 44%, which doesn't sound too bad until we look at all his predecessors. Trump 2.0 is below where Obama, Bush and Biden were this far in. He is beating one person, himself, back in 2017. But look, he was lowish at the beginning, but he still won an election. So what do his supporters think? The FT's John Byrne Murdoch has taken YouGov approval ratings and split them by type of Trump voter. The top lines are those who say they are MAGA Republicans, part of the Make America Great Again movement, about half of the total, and they are very solid. Overall, almost 100% approval. But look, Donald Trump needs more than just MAGA to win. The lower lines represent his other voters, with whom he has got a big problem. They're pretty happy on immigration, but on inflation, on the economy, and overall, he is tanking with them. Now, does it matter, given that under American rules, he can't run again? Maybe it does, because this time round, Americans are taking Trump more seriously. 68% do not think he is joking about taking over Greenland. 53% think he is serious about Canada. 62% think he might try to run again, although on all of those, the green bars represent a lack of support for the policies.
Thanks, Anushka. Now, I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by the former American ambassador to Denmark, appointed by Donald Trump in his first term. You're a great supporter of Donald Trump. I suspect you don't agree with much of the critical analysis you've just heard, but I do just need to start by asking you, you will have seen the polls that show that for this stage of an American president's term, Donald Trump is currently, in America, the least popular president of all time. So you surely can't argue it's all going very well.
Well, I mean, I look at this and see promises made, promises kept. I'm enjoying the 101st day of the golden age in America. And the media covers President Trump. I think it's 96% negative. It might be higher there in the UK, since your press is even further to the left than the US press, brainwashing people. And if we saw the tongue bath that Biden got every day, even in his diminished state, you know, it's hard to take the media, the legacy media, seriously.
But if you look at his promises, obviously he promised to cut down the numbers of people coming across the Mexican border, and he has achieved that. There's no issue around it. But data today showed that the American economy is shrinking, and it was only a matter of a couple of months ago that it was booming, and that is down to his tariffs. You must be concerned about that.
Of course not. It was down to government spending. Look at Joe Biden was shoveling money. They joked about it in the Biden administration. They were throwing gold bars off the Titanic. The economy was so inflated by government spending that literally the new jobs, they only went to government workers and immigrants. US citizens, we were losing jobs every month. That's how the economy was rolling for US citizens. It was not successful, and he inherited Joe Biden's economy. You all watching need to give President Trump's economic plan a chance. Just remember, in 2019, before the pandemic hit, we had the best economy in the history of our country, and he's bringing that back. Plus, he's promised to make us safe again, make us wealthy again, and make us healthy again. And he is on the road to do that, along with his great team.
Carla, it's absolutely gripping talking to you. We've got lots more we need to ask you. So if you could just hang on for a couple of minutes, because we do have to go for a very quick break. See you in a second.
Hello, welcome to the break, #Peston. Carla, I think you're with us. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you perfectly, Peston.
Thank you. It's Anushka here, and basically, obviously it's 101 days, and I was wondering if you could rank some of the big moments in the first 100 days, from the kind of most to least consequential. So I've got some pictures up here. We've got President Trump changing the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. His proposal to take over Gaza, and we've got a bit of that video that was produced as part of that. The cuts to USAID, the deal to deport migrants and alleged gang members to El Salvador. I've got a picture of Donald Trump here reading out his tariff announcement, and then that confrontation with Zelensky in the Oval Office. What's the biggest moment for you, Carlo? Is it one of those, or was it something else?
You know, I think every one of those moments is interesting. I would say deporting illegals from the US. I hope the UK does the same thing and you save your beautiful culture and society by getting illegal immigrants that don't share your values and your culture out of the UK. The US is working to do that right now with criminals, but most Americans, to a large extent, want all of the illegals out. And so that's the plan. And President Trump has a great secretary, Secretary Kristi Noem, who's laser focused on executing on that.
Okay. All right, and then I'm going to pull this up and then I'll bring the others in as well. So this next slide here is about the next 1,366 days. And which of these things is most likely to happen? Who's done that picture? We've got a picture of President Trump as the Pope because he joked today that he would make the best next Pope. And we have an image of the US taking over Greenland, Donald Trump winning the Nobel Peace Prize, falling out with Elon Musk, and running for a third term. Which of those do you think is most likely to happen?
Oh my gosh. I mean, I hesitate to weigh in because they're all, well, mostly so silly. You know, I would say the people of Greenland deserve development and security, and I hope that we're able to have closer cooperation in the future.
So you do think these are all quite silly, including him running again, including the Greenland?
No, I said I think that the Greenlandic people do deserve to have more opportunity and closer cooperation with us. Yeah.
Okay, so
but I don't think he's going to be the Pope at all.
Definitely. I think we all agree. Probably not the Pope. Is that picture an issue? Sorry, I've got to go. Bye.
Welcome back, Carla Sands, former ambassador, American ambassador to Denmark, great colleague of Donald Trump, is still with me. We just saw, Carla, the Canadian people electing as their Prime Minister a great critic of Donald Trump. Donald Trump has said he wants Canada to be the 51st state of America. Canadians have just voted to say they don't want to do that. So do you think Trump will now, your president, will stop trying to persuade Canadians to become part of America?
I don't really know what President Trump will do regarding Canada, but I do know that the Canadians deserve better than they've had. I mean, but they're going to have to live with their election. They're losing their free speech. There's a lot of Chinese Communist Party influence in Canada, and they've had uncontrolled immigration that I think 25% of their population is now illegal. The areas that were immigrants actually voted 80% in favor of this new socialist prime minister. So my heart goes out to the people of Canada, but they're going to have to sleep in the bed they made.
Mark Carney was governor of our Bank of England, and I don't think my colleagues here think he was a socialist. To be absolutely clear, he used to work for Goldman Sachs. Not many socialists work for Goldman Sachs.
I think there are a few, yeah.
OK. Now, on Greenland, do you think there was a time when Donald Trump seemed to imply that he wanted to take Greenland by force? Did he mean it?
You know, I have no idea what President Trump meant, but I do know that he sees Greenland as unsecure and undeveloped, and Denmark doesn't have the capacity to develop it or to defend it. They've never shown an interest in developing it. They've just let it kind of, you know, be up there as an asset that they own but can't afford to own. And they benefit from their relationship with Greenland. All the shipping goes through Denmark, all of the flights to Greenland almost all go through Denmark, and they have interest in some of the processing and fisheries up there. So net, Denmark benefits from their relationship with Greenland greatly. And the Greenlandic people just want to have opportunity, development, good paying jobs, successful tourism, but they're not going to get there with Denmark, unfortunately. It's just not going to happen. They don't have the capacity.
So he's not going to give up trying to get control of Greenland, in your view?
No, I think it's a national security issue, but it's also important for Europe's security. Listen, the Arctic isn't what it was 20 years ago or even 10 years ago with Russia and China flexing so hard. We need to wake up and realize it's not the same as it used to be. It's a more dangerous world. And we see that our friends in the UK, in the EU, they've focused on things like net zero and they've diminished their industries. They're not doing as well. They're not investing in the military now, starting to, but really they had taken the benefit of the peace dividend seriously and just shoveled a lot of money into social welfare programs rather than having credible defenses. I mean, the UK today, I may have said it before to you, they could not prosecute the Falklands War today because of the diminishment of the UK Navy. And we see the shrinking that's gone on. The U.S., we are now under President Trump's leadership, having a lethal force and becoming safer.
Well, one of the things that my guests tonight have agreed on with you is that Europe has to take more responsibility for its own defence and security,
Yes.
and that's certainly been stimulated by Trump. But just very briefly, and we're almost literally out of time, your revered constitution says presidents can only stay for 2 terms. Donald Trump has mooted staying for 3. Do you think he will try and stay for 3 terms?
Well, he's done so well. We would love it. However,
You would love it.
This
You
is
would
going
love
to
it.
be
I'm
a
not-
great term. He's making us wealthier, making us healthier, and
Yeah.
making us safer. I mean,
Yeah.
what
But-
he's doing, just finding a cause for autism and taking the dye out of our food. I mean, that should have been done decades ago. So the things that his team are doing seem like common sense, but they just were never done.
Carla, listen, it's an absolute joy having you on the show, and we hope to see you again soon.
Great to
Thank
be
you
here.
so much.
Thanks.
Right, I'm going to turn to one of the many really extreme socialists in the room, Andrew Mitchell. Carla sounds has definitely got your number. One of the things that is very clear is that the British people, on the whole, don't approve of Donald Trump. All the polls show that. You've got a leader, however, I mean, did we have a Prime Minister? I'm going to ask you both this question, who simply cannot bring themselves to say critical things about Donald Trump. Do you think, particularly given that you're in opposition, she could be a bit more bold in essentially calling out Donald Trump when he does things that she patently will disagree with?
Well, I think, she may do that. Actually, I give Keir Starmer credit for having tried to ease back some of the excesses of Donald Trump, and actually, in particular, on Ukraine, having, righted a ship that was taking in water very substantially. So I think there is room for greater criticism. One of the things is that in the amazing interview you've just done with the distinguished former diplomat who represented America in Denmark, one of the things which I think is particularly important is to look at the facts of what he's done to the American economy.
Which is what I was pointing out to her.
I mean, there's a very good speech that Ronald Reagan made about tariffs, which completely debunks the arguments that are being put and which are going to cause great trouble to the American economy and may well push America into a recession before very long. So I think focusing on that, it's the one thing, if you notice, that Donald Trump won't push aside. When the markets speak in America, he has had to accept, when the bond market spoke, for example, he immediately rode back.
Well, actually, it wasn't immediate. There was quite a lot of turmoil before they panicked
in
and
Donald
rode
Trump's
back.
terms, it was pretty immediate. But the point is this, that the economy is going to be the thing that exposes the very great dangers of the policies that he is pursuing. I think you're beginning to see that in Anushka's polling as well, that people are realising that. It is that, above all, I think, that will destabilise him.
If I could just actually put a much more specific issue to you, Emily, I don't know if you've seen the reports that the British government is supposedly helping Donald Trump in his business life secure the British Open at his Thornberry golf course. If the British government is doing that, is that appropriate?
I don't know about this. I don't know about this at all. I know that the Prime Minister and this government want to internationally be a force for good. And to be a force for good, if you engage with Donald Trump and can improve on some of the ideas that he has in a way that makes the world a better place.
Or maybe drop some of the ideas.
Or maybe... Can I just say something about Greenland?
Please.
Because the expert that you had a moment ago on Greenland and Denmark didn't, of course, remind us that the United States used to have 16 bases on Greenland.
Yep.
And they decided themselves to withdraw them. And I'm quite sure that if the Americans went to Greenland and said, would you like some more investment in US bases? Would you like some more employment in Greenland? They would say, absolutely. The only thing is we don't want you to eat our country because we would like to make decisions ourselves about our own future. And big countries shouldn't be allowed to take over small countries.
I agree. And listen, Andrew, unfortunately, I'm being told I've got to go to a break, but I will have time for both of you, lots more time, after that break, where we will have the excitement of talking to a member of Keir Starmer's cabinet, the Transport Secretary, Heidi Alexander. See you in a minute.
Hello, welcome to the second break, #Peston. You may have noticed that there was a very serious power cut in Spain and Portugal. And so I would like to ask you both how you might cope in certain situations without power. Would you be able to survive for 48 hours without electricity? Would you be able to get home, for example, if you didn't have trains to travel on? How do you travel? Could you walk, cycle?
I'm of a vintage that I remember power cuts from the 70s. I do remember not having any power, and it was a different world. I mean, I think I'd be all right in that I could cycle. I do cycle.
Well, you've only got to get to Islington from West.
Yeah, it's not very far. It's fine. You know, we both cycle, I think.
Yes.
We both. So we both. That's fine.
I'm her,
you know.
when I'm in London, I'm her constituent.
He's such a trouble. but so we can get backwards and forwards. But you know what? We know what we would all miss. We'd miss our phones.
Yeah.
What would we do? So
How
I
did
think
we cope with before them?
I don't know. I don't know. Did reading, but
Did we talk?
I think we might talk to each other. I mean, I'd be fine with a power cut so long as I was allowed to just go to bed. I think I'd be fine.
What about cash? Can't get. Would you be able to
I don't
manage?
need cash in bed. I'm just going to stay in bed.
I haven't really carried cash for ages. But I think I'd be all right. I don't want you to think I'm a pyromaniac or anything, but I have a great love of candles, not scented candles, candles. So I would immediately resort to candles. We have quite a lot around our house. And the other thing is I would live, as I did some years ago, on cereal. So I think I wouldn't need to cook. I'd live on cereal. I have candlelight.
What did you live on cereal a few years ago? How long for?
Which
cereal?
During my brief army career, I was known as cornflakes because
You were known as cornflakes?
I literally lived on cornflakes. So I'd retreat to eating cereal and reading by candlelight. And I think Emily's suggestion
Could
about
you build a
going
fire?
to bed as well is not a bad idea either.
And could you build an actual fire for us? Could either of you?
Could build a fire?
If we needed it for warmth?
Yeah.
I think so, yes.
Okay.
Matches. They're not
With
electric.
matches. Thank you. Bye.
Welcome back. Before the excitement of Labour's Transport Secretary Heidi Alexander, we've got a bit more Anushka.
So what did Labour need 2 days before local elections? They needed Tony Blair appearing to rail against their climate policies, as Robert has mentioned in a foreword to a report from the Tony Blair Institute. He said that the net zero debate was riven with irrationality and that voters were being asked to make financial sacrifices and change lifestyles. One chart in the report looked at energy across the world and showed that while renewables, this green bit at the top, are growing, the bulk in red is still fossil fuels and, again, is still growing. It got quite a backlash. Let me show you a couple of tweets here. Theo Bertram, who was head of research under Blair's number 10, said his old boss had got it wrong, that by trying to be spiky, he had just helped populist opponents of net zero. Accused by others of handing an election gift to Nigel Farage and Kemi Badenoch, Blair clarified his comments, making clear he does support all the government's targets. But look, he still wrote that forward and put it out on the day that actually the Climate Change Committee put out their own report suggesting that climate change is very much affecting us right now. I've picked out mentions of Heidi Alexander's brief with flood risks for a third of railways and roads that could rise, disruption because of extreme heat with rail buckling and speed restrictions. We all know that frustration, and yet we are massively behind as a country on adapting. The report looked at progress on 2023 recommendations for agriculture, infrastructure, the economy and so on. The green bits are where things are being achieved, and you might notice there are hardly any green bits.
Yeah, it's all a bit depressing, isn't it? Now, earlier I spoke to Heidi Alexander. I pointed out that the Climate Change Committee had criticised the government for not investing enough to prevent 50% of our roads and rails being in danger of being submerged by floods by 2050, and also that the rail track is exposed to the risk of dangerous overheating. So what did she make of that criticism?
So it's a really important report that has been published by the Climate Change Committee, and it is something that this government is very seized of. We do know that with climate change, there is more extreme weather events that happen, and so it's
critical. It will happen. I mean, the Climate Change Committee is saying, as of this moment, you are not investing enough. Are you confident that Rachel Reeves, you're going to get your budgets quite soon? Are you confident you will get the money you need?
There really is an alignment of interest here in terms of growing our economy and doing what's right for the economy, but also making sure that we are adapting to climate change and making sure that we are taking the action now so that we aren't going to be ravaged by these extreme weather events, which are going to cause untold problems.
So what do you then say to Tony Blair, who, in black and white, you've probably read his foreword, says that much of climate change policy is rightly seen by voters as irrelevant because climate change is coming, whatever the UK does, in terms of reducing emissions?
So I think what Tony has said in his report today is that actually we need to apply pragmatism and logic to our approach to the transition to net zero. He has been very clear that the approach that the current government is pursuing with regard to that transition is the right one. Tony is right to say that we should meet people where they are on this. And if you think of some of the decisions that I have taken as Transport Secretary, just in the last couple of months, that's exactly what we are doing.
Are you talking about the airports, for example? Are you talking about the permissions you've given to expand airports? Because, of course, that does run counter to what a lot of people who are worried about climate change would say you should be doing. So is that an example of your pragmatism, that you are allowing airport expansion?
So the example I was going to give you, Robert, was actually the changes that we have made to the zero emission vehicles mandate, which is the targets that we place upon the car industry in order to get to a phase out date in 2030.
We have absolutely discussed on this programme. Obviously, is an important change, but just talk to me about airports. Is airports an example of that kind of pragmatism? You are allowing expansion in a way that many climate campaigners would say is wrong. Is that an example of you being pragmatic?
So, look, I don't have children, Robert, but I do have nieces and nephews, and I want them to be able to fly and travel to different parts of the world in the way that I have. And I represent constituents who have families in other continents and businesses that trade internationally. The demand for aviation is growing.
But why won't you just accept that this is backing away from climate commitments?
If you let me finish, Robert. If you look at the modelling that has been done for Carbon Budget 6, which runs from the years 2033 to 37, the expansion of airports, including Heathrow, Luton, Gatwick and Bristol, has been taken into account and baked into that carbon modelling.
Hang on, the Climate Change Committee absolutely passionately disagrees with that. They passionately disagree with that. So, you know, you have to accept that you are taking a massive risk in terms of emissions by allowing this to go ahead. Some people say if you stick to what you've just talked about in terms of your budgets, Heathrow won't ever expand.
So it's a fact that the expansion of those airports that I've just listed has been baked into the modelling around Carbon Budget 6. What we also have a moral responsibility to do is to run as fast as we possibly can to greening aviation.
We're a million miles from green fuel being a viable alternative, as you know. I've got one final question for you, which is about...
That's not true, Robert.
It is true. I'm immersed in...
It's not.
It is not commercially viable. Find me an airline that is prepared to go over to green fuel now because it's commercially viable. One. Anywhere.
So all airlines will have an obligation to have a green fuel proportion in the engines that are fuelling their aircraft. We've got commercial production of SAF at a place called Immingham on Teesside with a company called Phillips 66. It's really important that we stimulate the domestic production of SAF so that we're not importing it, so that we've got good jobs here.
Sure, we're a million miles from it being a commercial proposition. Now, finally, on British
It's being
Steel,
commercially produced at the moment, Robert, at Immingham.
Not in scale. Now, on British Steel, you, according to the Prime Minister, are committed to buy the steel from Scunthorpe for the expansion of the rail network. It will be hugely expensive. Is that money really well spent?
Network Rail have budgeted to buy the steel from British Steel. They were probably one of the top clients of British Steel, and the action that we took a few weeks ago enables that to continue to be true in the future, and actually, you know, keeps the hope alive at Scunthorpe of actually having a really successful, secure, viable future for that plant.
Heidi Alexander, as always, very good to see you. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Right, I'm going to move the subject on because we've got local elections, mayoral elections, by-election tomorrow. Now, many people say these will confirm that the era of politics dominated by the two big parties is definitively over, that we are in an era of multi-party democracy, fragmentation. Do you agree?
No, I don't. I think that we have a system of what first past the post, and our political parties have developed to reflect that. And we have a coalition on the left that is the Labour Party and the coalition on the right that is the Conservative Party.
But the Greens are eating into your vote, the Lib Dems are eating into your vote, and for Andrew Mitchell, the Reform is eating your vote
I mean,
massively.
So if I can do it in 3 sentences. So that's the first sentence. The second one is that there will be times when people will want to, and rightly or wrongly, will want to protest against, you know, the representation that they get from the coalition on the left or the coalition on the right, and they will find other parties. But in the end, there will be 2 main parties.
Now, tomorrow... I need to check with Andrew. Are the small parties a protest, or are they here to stay in scale?
So no one is quite sure what's happening tomorrow, and the vote may be too low to reach any substantial conclusions. But if you look at the polls at the moment, it is possible that for the first time for many, many decades, instead of having 2 major parties in the House of Commons, after another election, we could have 4, and that's what the polls show. But I remind you that when the SDP were incubating, when they were at over 50% in the polls, people expected a massive breakthrough. It never happened, and it's a very long time till the next election.
There have been, however, massive background changes like social media, so we are to an extent in new territory. I'm going to pick up this with you on another time because that's it. Don't forget that on the eve of important votes tomorrow for councils, mayors and even an MP, democracy is the best and most precious system of government, even if occasionally it empowers Trump. Think about that. Goodbye.